Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our session today. On behalf of Beacon House, the organizer of School of Tomorrow events, I'd like to welcome you to Towards Happier Futures, the 14th edition of School of Tomorrow events. Nonprofit SOT Events was launched by Beacon House in 2000 as part of its social responsibility and to help inform the direction of the organization while also engaging global communities in conversations shaping the future of schools and societies. So, this year's theme is one close to everyone's heart, titled Towards Happier Futures. We've all been through the last couple of months with the pandemic weighing heavily and putting all sorts of restrictions and anxiety on us. So this conference in here, we'll talk about some, challenges that we've seen, and more than anything, the hope that we see toward building this happier future. My name is Anam Sadek, and I'm moderating this session on behalf of Beacon House School System. I am the co-founder of EdCasa, which is Pakistan's fastest growing educational technology company, enabling high school students with exam preparation. We hope to get to 1 million students by next year. It is my great pleasure to welcome you today to this live session at the 14th edition of the School of Tomorrow events. Today, I have a rockstar panel with me, and so I'd like to introduce my panel. We have Ms. Hasina Karbi, who has been working to provide sustainable livelihood in a safe environment for women and children for more than 31 years. She is the founder of Impulse NGO Network. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Hasina. I have Ms. Mehnaz Rahman with me. She has been working as a resident director at Aurat Foundation in the regional office in Karachi since 2010. She is a prominent activist of women's rights and socio-political issues with a journalistic background. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Mehnaz.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Hamza Farooq. He is the founder of Bunde Shams and vice president of macro sales at Goldman Sachs. Hamza has developed a bold, cost effective, and sustainable solution to the global water crisis called the Oasis Box. And he and his team is on a mission to bring clean water to 1 million people in the next year. And my last panelist for today, who's also another heavyweight, is Mr. Riaz Kamlani. He is the CEO of the Citizens Foundation. He has been associated with the TCF since 2008, and he has a vast set of experience having worked previously for the private sector as well as for not for profit and being a grounded educator. So, thank you everybody for being here today. I'm really looking forward to a very rich conversation. So, let me just jump into the topic for today. Also, before I do that, I'd love to welcome our audience who's tuned in live. We would love to hear from you. Please share with us where you're at, who you are, what's your background, so that we can have your voice along with us with this rockstar panel. So, the topic for today is around child labor. So, already Pakistan has struggled with poverty, and then there was an unprecedented economic impact caused by COVID-19 pandemic. And then the schools closure and inadequate government assistance is pushing children into an exploitative and dangerous child labor situation, according to the Human Rights Watch, with a report that it published in July 2021. So it is estimated that about 16.7 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 are engaged in child labor in South Asia. And this region has the highest prevalence of child labor in the world. While the full scale of COVID-19 crisis is still emerging in the region, it is clear that the pandemic has had a significant negative impact on the region's economies. So, given the situation and the enslavement that child labor has caused and is on the rise, so this is the background and the context of today's topic. But given that the conference is focusing on a happier future, we'll highlight challenges, but we'll also talk about hope. And that's why we have this spectacular panel doing amazing work and taking the necessary actions to tackle this critical issue. So I'd love to jump right in. And my opening question to all the panelists is, how have you seen the impact of COVID-19 negatively affecting the issue of child labor? And given the hope that we're trying to target here, what are some key measures your organization is doing to counter this effect? I would love to start with you, Ms. Hasina.
Thank you very much. So, if we're looking at COVID-19, I think globally it has affected especially a lot of developing countries where the economic livelihood of many family has been affected badly, especially when you're looking at people below poverty line, even people in the middle class who are losing a lot of their job, and especially those family who have children who they were supposed to be sending to school. They're losing out and sending them to school going online, where not every family have the capacity, or the equipment, or where everything went online that is possible for them. So it has affected the education of many of the children who didn't have access to technology. And the work that we have been doing in Southeast Asia, we have seen that people in the economic brim who have lost a job has basically have children to go to work. But at the same time, COVID-19 is also showing a pathway that the demand for child labor is actually increasing. As more lockdown is opening up, many businesses who have lost their businesses are actually engaging more child labor. So that is something which is alarming. And family, because of the economic conditions, are unable to stop the fact that they have to send the children to school. So it's very important that businesses and government look as far as the fact that many countries in South Asia has actually signed the UN Convention on the Right of a Child. So the UN, the CRC. So if they have signed that, it is important that they are responsible to see that children's rights are not violated. Increase of child labor should not be there. Businesses should be sent an alarming notification that they cannot, basically employ children, because once many of the businesses will ensure that they will get, they will try to get the money back, for what they've lost. So employing child labor becomes, one of the factor. And family who've lost the economic are people who would definitely send children to work. So these are the dynamics that one has to see. And it's also one of the factor that we are seeing ourselves as organization that who's working in this field, that the increase of child labor will come back. It's not that it was never there, it was there, but the impact will be much more higher. And the need for more collaborative support system or collaborative engagement to see that children are not going to be put into that vulnerable state, it's an important factor that I think Southeast Asia will need to work collectively. And businesses will have to be more, government will have to be stringent with businesses who are employing children as child labor.
Very well said, Ms. Hasina. There needs to be a collaborative effort in the region. And that makes me turn to Ms. Mehnaz. Ms. Mehnaz, with your work at the Aurat Foundation, have you seen a resurgence of exploitation of children and these issues in Pakistan?
Yes, as we work very closely with UN Women, UNICEF, UNDP, so in the words of UNICEF Executive Director, I totally agree that in times of crisis, child labor becomes a coping mechanism for many families. As poverty rises, schools closes, and availability of social services decreases. More children are pushed into the workforce. As we reimagine the world post COVID, we need to make sure that the children and their families have the tools they need to weather small storms in the future. Quality education, social protection services, and better economic opportunities can be game changers. Vulnerable population groups such as those working in the informal economy and migrant workers will suffer most from economic downturns. Like we have many Bengali, Burmese, and other migrant population in Karachi especially, so they will suffer more, and we should think some solution about them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing insight. So, Mr. Riaz, I'd like to come to you now. We talked about how school closures have forced students out of school. How has this, how have you seen this playing out at the Citizens Foundation? Now that schools have opened, are you seeing the students coming back, or is there still a dropout?
Thank you, Anna. Firstly, I think I'd like to segue from what Mrs. Sina has said, which is the fact that during the pandemic, the digital divide has become more pronounced and more visible. And I think that's absolutely true for low income families, which have really suffered in terms of their livelihoods. But the trail that we're really seeing in this topic is that, or the hypothesis is that because of the pandemic, there's been a dropout from schools, and that dropout has led to child labor. I think both those contentions need to be examined more closely. And I can share our vantage point as a practitioner on both, because to me, it's not a logical conclusion to firstly assume dropouts and then to assume that every dropout does lead to child labor. In our experience, what we've seen that yes, there have been dropouts, but the first bit has been that whilst the schools were closed, there was a significant pressure because these children didn't have a digital option. So in the low income neighborhoods, there's a discontinuity or a learning gap which has been very prominent compared to better equipped households. Um, but the dropout there is not necessarily something that is a question of circumstance. What we see is it's often by choice as well. Because if schools aren't open, particularly for the low fee private sector, the parents choose not to pay the fee because they don't see the point in that. So what I'm hearing in the low fee private school very frequently now is that parents have accumulated, let's say, a year of debt in terms of outstanding school fees. And instead of school A, they have now taken their child to school B, and there they can just start off afresh. So I think it's too early to call it whether there has been a huge surge of dropouts or not, because I think as the new academic year has begun, the dust on this will settle. And particularly for the public sector in low fee private school, you'll see the real impact on dropouts. Secondly, I would say it's not a linear connection that every child who drops out will engage in child labor. Um, what our experience says at ECF is that education in Pakistan is not a demand side issue anymore. It's largely a supply side issue. So there is a strong implicit demand available for education. And what we find, often parents are sending back their children to school. The last thing that I would say is, particularly for TCF, in the midst of the pandemic, we had one very clear focus to ensure that the child, and particularly the girl child, does not drop out, to retain our children. And for that, the very nominal fee that we take, which is 5 to 10% of the cost per child, we even drop that down. We help them get uniforms, we help them get books, so that the child can stay at school. And as a consequence, we have seen our enrollment increase instead of decline. So I think it's a nuanced, complicated landscape where we should see it with that particular nuance, where dropouts is too early to call, and whether it's child labor, it's not a logical connection.
Well said, yeah, Saab. Indeed, time will sort of show us in greater detail what the result has been and how much it's been exacerbated. Hamza, I'd like to come to you and ask you what you've observed on the field. How have traditionally children been supporting their households, and how has it been affected since COVID?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, like I think this has been a very fruitful conversation so far, and I'm gonna riff off of a few things said by all the panelists. I think sort of at the outset, I like to think of this issue as a consortium of issues that all work together to create the kind of sort of the status quo that we have for children in Pakistan or South Asia more broadly, Southeast Asia more broadly. And I think it is sort of an intersection of yes, the supply and demand side issues. It is a reflection of the economic reality for a lot of low income households in low income countries, right? Like if you need to support your household, there's only a certain amount of labor that's available to do that. And for people who are stuck inside and have to choose between putting food on the table and sort of like having their children work, that becomes sort of this microeconomic problem, which if a lot any of us was put in that position, we'd have to make some sort of a judgment call. So it is a little bit of reflection of the economic reality, and then of course it is a reflection of the historical norms that have existed in a lot of the industries that are prevalent, and that employ sort of children for their work, including the carpet industry, including a few others, including brick mills. And then we can obviously get into the details of why it happens. But I think sort of if you take a step back and you zoom out of the problem, you start seeing how they all connect in sort of this melting pot of issues. And then any solution that one provides either has, to me, sounds like has to do one of two things. Either has to be this wholesome, holistic, collective sort of response that coordinates across all these multiple functions and provides one holistic sort of solution, which is often near impossible because that requires intergovernmental, non-profit, corporate collaboration, which is often very lacking, or it has to be something extremely specific, right? So in our work, for instance, we realized that one of the key issues leading children to work at farms or in these rural communities was in fact a lack of clean drinking water, right? It's a very specific issue that we targeted, which is saying when you have to choose between not having drinking water versus letting your female child walk 4 kilometers to collect that water, you're going to choose latter because it affects the rest of the family. So what we've started to do is, in conjunction with school in rural communities, is start setting up these water filtration units that are much closer to home, removing one of the key obstacles that people face in the provision, and sort of like that can push them towards sort of this statistic of child labor. So I think, obviously we'll get into the rest of the discussion, but to me it is a collective set of things, and it is also, requires us to become very specific about how we approach them.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Thanks for sort of summarizing, our first introduction point, which is to say that this issue of child labor is very nuanced and very complex, and many disciplines and many streams sort of come into this for it to be at the point that it is at. So let's take a step back and let's talk about why the children of the global south bear the burden of the economic crisis and forego their education. So in this regard, I'd like to start with you, Ms. Mehnaz, since you work right on the field and with families.
Yeah, children in Pakistan have been subjected to the worst forms of exploitation. I mean, not only child labor, but commercial sexual exploitation, and forced
Ms.
domestic
Mehnaz, I'm
work.
so sorry to interrupt right now. Could you please speak a little louder? Thank you.
Okay, just a minute. Give me a minute. Uh, Yeah, I was speaking about the issues of children of Pakistan, along with child labor. There are commercial sexual exploitation and forced domestic work, each sometimes as a result of human trafficking. Human trafficking is a very big issue. Children also engage in forced labor in brick kilns and agriculture. Most child domestic workers worked under conditions of forced labor, including the debt bondage. We know in Karachi we find many domestic workers whose parents have taken debt, loan from someone, and then they send their children to work in their homes. Sexual assault and extreme physical abuse. We have come across so many cases of extreme physical abuse. So poor rural families sometimes sell their children into domestic servitude or other types of work, or pay agents to arrange for such work. uh, this is our experience that we have come through our work. So often believing their child would work under decent conditions. Parents think that their child will work under decent conditions, but they are subjected to worst kind of sexual abuse or physical abuse. Children are also kidnapped or sold into organized begging rings, domestic servitudes, gangs, and child sex trafficking. Reports, the reports in Pakistan have estimated that around 70% of bonded laborers in Pakistan are children. Begging ringmasters sometimes maim children to earn more money or force children to steal, and organize criminal groups for children. So it's not only the issue of pandemic. There have been issues before that, and the honorable people present in this panel, they are doing great work, but so much more has to be done. What NGOs are doing is just a drop in the ocean. It has to be done, as Mr. Hamza said, a holistic approach is needed. Government, corporate sectors, NGOs, everyone should stand up and do something for our children, because they are not only suffering from pandemic, they are suffering from all these abuses that I have just mentioned.
Yes, indeed. It is. It has been a difficult. I'm so sorry. Just 1 second. Yes, I was saying that it has always been a very difficult situation, especially in the global south. And Ms. Hasina, I'd like to circle to you. You have been working on forced trafficking issues around that. So could you please tell us what you have seen on ground, and is it something that you think is just in this region more so, and in what you've seen in different countries?
I think working in, like I just said, working in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and having said, that trafficking of child labor has been there pre-COVID, and now with the COVID lockdown, many of them has lost the job. but there has been a lot of businesses that was using children during COVID time as well. That has been our experiences, especially in some of the manufacturing, in some of the kind of work that they require children and cheap labor, because the sales or the profit was not very much. But I would say that commitment of states in South Asia, with the UN, CRC, the Convention on the Right of a Child, will need to be looked deeper, especially now with the fact that lockdown is opening up and businesses are opening up. A lot of businesses that has closed also will need to ensure that the rules and regulation of every country that is mandatory not to employ children, in labor forces or forced labor, needs to be more stringent in the check and balances. Cross-border human trafficking is a work that we have been doing, and I think like what our first panelist just now has just said, Mehaz, about the fact about trafficking. Trafficking is just not about labor, but it's also sexual exploitation when it comes to the girl child, because then she becomes highly vulnerable of the fact that it's just not about labor, but it's also sexual exploitation when there is a demand. Now, the other thing that I really wanted to come about is that we, as organization, whether different institution, whether we are from the education, we are from the nonprofit, or we are from the government, we need to come up together with relooking what are the way forward, with COVID situation, and also with the fact that it's opening up. What should we do to ensure that child labor does not increases? What do we really need collectively to ensure that cross-border check and balance becomes much more stringent to help children's right being met? So the children of the future right cannot be met if we don't look at cross-border issues as well. Because for us who works Indo-Nepal and Indo-Bangladesh, what we have seen that right now when the opening up is taking place, we are seeing a lot of children are coming to work because the family has lost their income. So they would be paid certain amount of money to send the children back to work. So this is check and balance on cross-border, where border forces and the government needs to look into it so that we ensure that trafficking for labor does not increases. It's not that it was never there before. It was very much there, but it'll increase more right now. And the fact that companies and businesses, will also needs to take the commitment, to ensure that they are not going to recruit children, because if they start doing recruitment of children and everything goes underground, where the visibility is not there, the businesses will thrive, but the check and balance is not there, and children will still continue to be exploited as child labor. So these are factors that requires cooperation among countries, that requires cooperation, that there is more dialogue, and also institution to come together to see how these can be done or can be taken forward. We have worked on children's issues for a very, very long time as an institution, as an organization. We have seen the challenges that is already there, but now the challenges is much more complex. So complexity can only be overcome if we have multiple approach, and we have a single window platform where we engage multiple stakeholder, both the private and the public, to actually have a dialogue, to have to see how work can be taken forward.
Thank you, Ms. Hasina, for showing us the perils that lie in the future as well, that now that economies are opening up, this issue of trafficking can become worse because children have to go back and contribute to the economies. So, Hamza, I'd like to circle back to you and discuss with you, the legislation. We've ratified UN conventions and so on. There's a lot of legislation around, curtailing trafficking and so on, but still we see cross-border trafficking. I know your work spans across different countries, so I'd like to take insight from you that why is it that the children of the South, of the global South, sort of bear the brunt of this more so?
I think no, absolutely, and I think your very last phrase does justice to the rest of the conversation, which is the global South, right? And it's sort of, if you start charting and if you just did a little bit of a data mapping exercise and you looked at all the countries that have the issue of child labor and you juxtapose that with low income countries, you juxtapose that with GDPs, you juxtapose that with the prevalent industries in those countries, you're going to start seeing these trends and patterns. that are far more instructive and far more informative, that any kind of convention would do justice to. I mean, it's the same reason why we're all part of. This harkens back to our first ever discussion in 2010. It harkens back to, we're all part of the UN Convention on Removal of, atomic waste and whatnot, right? Nobody does it still. Pakistan, India, actually the two that don't actually ratify that, but the rest of the world is, and we still have it. It's the same reason why we're all signed up for COVAX, but this global south isn't really getting vaccine. It's for the same reason, which is when push comes to shove, we tend to look inside. When push comes to shove, we tend to look at people within the confines of our borders, right? So it becomes a tribal mindset of sorts, where you start picking and choosing from the list of things available to you and start allocating according to your own preferences and priorities. So I think there is a general trend towards which we're all headed, which is I think we're globalizing much faster in 2010s. We've slowed down since, but hopefully we get to a point where we start realizing the gains. And the reason I mention that is with problems that are this sort of holistic and this broad, you need countries to come together at the intragovernmental level to strike not just conventions and notifications. I mean, COP26, half the world flew in on 400 private jets. That's not a solution to the problem. That's in fact exacerbating the problem. So sort of these kind of like, signposting for what needs to be done doesn't solve the issue. It's really like, folks like the panelist here who are on the ground fixing stuff is what matters. So from my perspective as somebody who spent time in obviously Pakistan, in 2019 I was in South Sudan, which is one of the the second newest country formed in the world, where any of these issues that you see in Southeast Asia are just exacerbated by a factor of 10, right? Where if we think we have issues, like let's go and sort of like see what the situation in South Sudan, you start seeing, and it is not at all a reflection of just what the South Sudanese people represent. It is a matter of these historical injustices that have been done, right? So I mean, for Pakistan or Southeast Asia, you could very well draw a parallel between our colonial history and the kind of industries that exist. And I think this is probably an example that we should lean into, which is in sort of the 1900s, the industries that were set up in South Asia broadly, in Pakistan, for instance, right, in India, were extractory institutions in the sense that they were set up so that the raw materials could be exported to Britain and whatnot. What were those industries? Cotton, sugarcane, possibly some minerals. You got spices, and then you got the carpet industry. If you look at the top 7 sort of industries contributing to child labor, those 5 exist in the top 7. So it is absolutely a factor of how institutions are set up in developing countries, including Pakistan, that then spiral into the next part of the issue, which is, well, who's going to do the work? And turns out children are actually better suited to do that work, and then becomes an economic problem. If you are a household, again, right, as a father, would you rather till the farm or would you go pick the cotton, which is better suited to women and children? So then you start making these micro assumptions, which end up leading to sort of this consortium of ideas that we discussed before. So I think all that really means, and the way I would sort of like summarize that is, absolutely we need to sort of like sign these accords with other countries. Absolutely we need to work on fixing the problem more broadly, but what we really need is introspection of the broad mix of stuff we do. And I think one of the key solutions in that mix of stuff is going to be this transition from agrarian sort of societies broadly to more technology-based industries, where child labor is kind of defunct. Unless you're trained in 16 years of computer science, you're not going to be able to be sort of doing some of the sort of the things that you're required to do. So I think it is a natural juncture, and one which needs to really sort of be looked at with a fine comb.
Good. I think it's very interesting what you said about the transfer from an agrarian economy to a more skill-based one. But then in that, the big piece is education. And then there's this chicken and egg problem. Does the child go to school? Does the child contribute to the household? And it's a very, very difficult choice to make. So Riasab, coming to you, how are you seeing these choices being made grassroots?
So I think the way these choices are made at the grassroots has very little to do with the pandemic. I think we need to understand firstly the larger dynamic of it. For those who can afford more, there is a there could be a tendency to patronize the choices that a parent from a lower socioeconomic strata makes. And I think that's unfair. So let's start off from that. We've been on the ground for 27 years, so I can speak from that vantage point. And we've seen a couple of very clear trends. One is that, as I said earlier, that education is no more a demand side issue, that parents want to send their children to school. And when I say children, I mean both boys and girls. What parents really want is a school that works for them. And what do I mean when I say it works for them? A, it's accessible. Their boy child as well as their girl child ideally can walk to school, number one. Number two, there is safety. En route to the school, within the school, the child is safe. Number three, it's not a waste of time. The child is actually learning something. And learning something, we often make that connection with livelihoods, and livelihoods are important. But I've sat down in south of Punjab with a group of completely illiterate women who could only speak Saraiki, and I can't speak Saraiki, therefore there's a translator in between, where that woman says to me, it's not for livelihood. It's not, metric क्यों करना है, इसलिए नहीं कि बच्चा कुछ कमा सके, इसलिए कि बेहतर इंसान बन सके. Metric, we don't want to do the metric so that, it's a direct contribution to livelihood, so that you have a better human being. So I think there the parental choices are very clear that they want a better future for their child. Nobody, no matter how well-meaning, can want a better future for the child compared to the parents. So they are the ones who are really invested. They see education as a clear pathway. They want something that is accessible, that is safe, and that is actually meaningful. And if you can provide that, pandemic, no pandemic, socioeconomic strata, lower or higher, we find that will hold strong.
That gives us all hope, right? The fact that parents are so invested in their child's education, and actually not a demand side issue. That's what I've seen as well, being an educator in Pakistan. Even though we work with technology and high school students, which is a slightly higher bar than more students in primary levels. So some key takeaways from this very important question of why the global south sort of bears the burden of child labor. Hamza mentioned the historical context, that it has been a history of exploitation and the economy, where an agrarian economy where children were actually more useful, and now we have to make that progression into a more skill-based economy. And the part education is playing, as Riyaz Saab said, that there is willingness. They see the education transforming lives, not just in terms of a better livelihood and degree earning, but just in terms of transformation of character. Ms. Hasina, discussed how there's lack of enforcement of legislation, and Mehnaz Appa as well talked about, how trafficking, forced human trafficking is a big issue, and that it is a cross-border issue, and countries need to work together in a framework in order to ensure that this trafficking is contained. So this leads, I would actually really urge the audience to continue asking their questions, continue sending their comments. We have allocated about 15 minutes to answer their questions, so please keep sending them in. We have an amazing panel of experts here, willing and ready to take your questions. My next question would be again around policy. What are two policies that you think need to be put in place to get better outcomes and lower this issue of child labor and exploitation? In this regard, Hamza, if we could start with you, please.
Sure. Look, I think policy making is always tough, right? I think because when we think of policy making, we want it to be sort of be all end all way of trying to tackle the problem. And I think policy making in the context of the global south needs to be seen within the context of the global south. Stuff on paper often does not translate to actual implementations. So I think, yes, we'll speak about policy making, but I think what we need ahead of that are strong institutions that can in fact enforce those policies, right? And I think that goes everywhere from the judicial system we have in Pakistan or India or the other places around the world that need this, plus sort of our reliance and sort of trust on state institutions that are responsible for the implementation, including our bureaucracy, including our sort of civil service officers and whatnot. So I think we really need to invest into those sort of like implementation arms as we think of policy making. Because what tends to happen often that I've seen with policy making broadly, is you get sort of the M&As together in a room, and suddenly there's this fervor and some video that went viral, and there's this hoo-ha around launching a new thing named after the one specific victim who went through the crisis, and then everybody celebrates and it goes viral, and then Imran Khan comes and gives a speech, and it's like, great. Then what? What happened? Have the statistics drop? Has there been sort of a baseline sort of survey that was done ahead of this policy being launched? Has it been tracked since? Not really. Okay, are people starting to come out and say, yeah, like I actually know the police officer or whatnot who was implementing this, and they made some difference? We don't tend to hear those narratives, right? So I think we kind of, so sorry to answer the sort of the question with a question, which is we need to sort of step back from reliance on policy making often, which is super important, but also invest in the sort of the implementation arms. Now, what with the baseline assumption that, let's say, we have strong implementation partners, including the nonprofit sector, the corporate sector, and our own government, then the kind of stuff that needs to happen in pursuit of preventing child labor, specifically this issue, I'd say, if I have to say two things. Number one would be to try and pivot away from the mix of industries that we currently sort of rely on for our livelihood. And the reason for that is, to the extent that we're still stuck, so this is kind of indirectly tackling the problems, to the extent that we're stuck in cotton as our primary corp, as long as we're stuck with carpet making. By the way, and sorry to sort of like kind of put any of us who already do this on the spot, but I'm pretty sure all of us have those nicely done rugs in our homes, right? And we tend to just go to Southern and like buy them without thinking too much about the history of where they come from. And I'm guilty. I've got one here. I brought it all the way from Pakistan to London because I wanted to represent my culture. But as we look into this topic, I realized, in fact, it tells a darker story than I'd like to tell. So now it's a representation for stuff that I need to avoid, right? So we need to become very conscious of our choices, but to the extent that the government at policy level, we need to pivot away from industries that support this kind of labor, because then when you can't stop people from making efficient, good micro decisions, which is a dad will always go till the land, and a child or the mother will always pick the cotton. It is going to be very hard to prevent that. You can have institutions which say, okay, nobody under the age of 16 or 14 should be employed, which in Pakistan, by the way, we do. In 2020, we signed something in September where we said, okay, this will be prevented. It doesn't work, right? So that's one. The other would be to take a foundational approach to it, which is to look at the factors also kind of indirectly that lead to child labor. So there, I mean, I'm obviously invested in the scheme of making sure everybody has basic necessities, including access to clean water. That's another one I would really lean into, which is you cannot go the day without drinking water, right? None of us can. So then that's also a micro choice that often needs to be made, and you tend to allocate it to the person who is skilled enough only to carry stuff, and oftentimes that are young children. So there, I think the policy should be around making sure that all these rural communities have access to sort of safe drinking water. And in that regard, the work we've done, and you mentioned the word Oasis Box, our product really is this sort of solar powered clean water filtration unit, which costs 4 lakh rupees, works for 20-25 years, filters clean water, and can be readily deployed anywhere around the world. And it can be deployed genuinely in 10 minutes. So it is a sort of like a quick fix to the water crisis. And we're trying to tackle, and this is interesting, right? When I come to these panels, I tend to tackle sort of these broader questions, all of which eventually ultimately end up leading to conversation about water, because that's foundational. So I think from my perspective, it would be a policy around clean water for rural communities, and it would be about sort of implementing a strong mix of industries that pivot away from just reliance on aggregating society.
Thanks for that perspective. And I think it's really important how you talked about micro decisions, right? Or we sort of feel so helpless in these situations when it comes to child labor. It seems like there's so many issues and it's only a policy issue, but actually it's also a consumer choice. So thanks for bringing our attention there. Mehnaz Appa, I'd like to come to you now and find out your perspective on this.
Yeah, my answer is very short. I think two policies are needed. First is comprehensive social security system, social protection for all. The government is doing it on a very small scale in the form of SAS program, but the demand of civil society is that we should have a comprehensive social protection system for each and every citizen. And my second demand or suggestion is that the education and health should be free. The government should have the policy to provide free education and health to all the citizens. Yes, only.
Well, that is in the Constitution. It is the child's right.
Yeah,
And I think it's a
yeah.
great segue into Ryasa, your comments.
GNM. So I think firstly I'll agree with what Hamza is saying. I don't think we're light on policy, and it's very easy to roll off many other prescriptions, but get those things done on the ground. Execution is the issue. And I think what I would add to that is there also needs to be a deeper sense of realism and nuance when making policy. And that pertains to my mind to microfinance, to water, to a number of other social sectors. But look at schooling. Education is one very good example of that. Now, we do say that education is the responsibility of the state, and therefore there should be public schools where children should go. Back in the early 80s, there was something like 3,500 low-fee private schools. By recent research, there are over 60,000 just in Punjab. If you add the country, there are probably over 100,000 low-fee schools. That's a reality. And that reality, which now cannot be undone by the state, because the state cannot just suddenly come up with the fiscal space to put up another 100,000 schools. So there, the relationship between the public and the private sector, and I don't mean the not-for-profit private sector, I mean the low-fee profit-making private sector, that has to be rethought through, really. So in the midst of the pandemic, many sectors got support. This sector, conspicuous by its absence, did not get any support. When it comes to public-private partnerships, particularly with the low-fee private sector school system, it's very patchy. Some provinces have done it somewhat better, but even there, it's been a patchy execution. So implementation is key, firstly, and secondly, really with a sense of realism, reconceptualizing the role of the public-private sector. Structurally, I think that has to be the path to go.
Thank you for that comment. Ma'am Hasina, I'd like to come to you and understand more from a regional perspective. What are some things that can be done in collaboration? What are some policies that can be made and implemented, actually?
So we're looking at Global South. I think the SARC Convention, has not amended child labor, has not made it a priority. So I think it's time that the SARC Convention needs to relook so that we can have a Global South engagement when it talks about any bilateral or intergovernment or cross-border, whether we talk about forced labor, children trafficked for labor, because that is only one window that can be looked much more deeply. The second part is that policy, I think, as an organization and working in these 4 countries, and who has been part and parcel of, policies, developing policies with the government. The gap there in a policy is the working rules, because a policy will be a document that a state, a country takes stand that we are doing something for children, but the working document or the working rules actually facilitate action on the ground that engages civil society and others, to collectively work together. Because sometimes there's also this issue about you have a policy, but it's a mismatch in terms of services that is available on the ground. So it's important that working rules are being developed to simplify implementation, to address child labor issues at every level. Now, if we are talking about Global South, countries has made it a point that education till the age of 14 is mandatory. But with digital age and the internet not reaching out the far-flung areas of many, many places, that will still be, a dream for many children that cannot connect if they are far off in different villages. So internet facilities has to look into the services that's going to be provided, make it more of a public availability for children who would need to get that right to education. So that is an important element. So right to education can happen if the technology policy ensure that internet services is available and far-flung. Then you can connect. Now, not having devices, they have to have places that also would actually give access to children that needs to go to school. I mean, I'm just not talking about people who can access private school. The other, SARC, as a unit, needs to start discussing a global South and how a SARC convention can actually amend and recognize child labor as an important part on children's right, and how can it amend so that the reality becomes, a much, I would say, practically applied by organization who works on the ground like us, on many, many more other organizations that are there. Because when we sit in a meeting, we are happy signing off a policy. But when we come out, we don't know how that policy will actually translate into working rules, and which are the intergovernmental that has to work with it, and what kind of support system is required. So these are elements that needs to be, an important pathway for all of us to see and government to see together.
Thank you for those recommendations and more questions around this area. And we're getting a lot of interest from the audience. Thank you so much, audience, for tuning in and listening and sharing your thoughts and questions. So I'd like to read one out. And the format of this is that any panelist can just jump in and answer it. What are some factors? The question is, what are some factors that lead to an increase in enslavement and increase in child labor?
Okay, let me just, I think consumerism, as I think our panelists has also mentioned there, we need to be more conscious of what we purchase. Then globally, global South will be, look that what we buy, whether it's child labor free. If that one small step actually is being taken by every one of us, will definitely reduce child labor, because then we will not stand by any product being purchased, which is made by children. So that's one part of it in terms of the economics of it.
I think I was just going to jump in and say, I think absolutely part of it is our consumer choices. I think the other part of it is sort of this understanding of how connected we in fact can be. I think that's a realization that we all need to sort of ponder a bit over. I think it kind of riffs off the point about consumer goods, but I think it's really sort of somehow being able to see the sort of your transaction go from you purchasing a carpet to somebody, actually a child making it in the north of Pakistan, is something which I found to be fairly instructive, and it's something which actually makes an impact. I think one thing I would add there is it is important to tell these stories. I think people have become a bit sort of immune to statistics. I think we all know that as economists and statisticians, but it is powerful. I think we need to tell these stories. We need to have more of these conversations, and I think we need to really push this agenda in that holistic sense.
So one of the things that, being in Pakistan, sorry, Minazaba, please go ahead. You're on mute.
I was saying that the gap between have and have not has been increased to an alarming extent. So we should focus on a just distribution of resources, equitable distribution of resources. It's very wrong that some people are holding 80% of resources and the rest of them have to do with only 20% of resources. So this is unjust system, and we have to change this system.
Yes, that's absolutely a very important factor, rising inequality that will definitely directly impact the prevalence of child labor. So just while I was thinking about this question, another question popped in my mind, which was, does support, we see children asking, begging on the streets, and oftentimes we feel moved and we give them some money. Does that further exacerbate the issue of child labor from your experience or analysis?
I think begging, has also become a syndicate of traffickers engaging children from low income and are being brought from different villages, at least the context of Nepal and Bangladesh and India. And I'm sure it has the similarities in Pakistan as well. The nexus of trafficking for begging, it's an alarming aspect of getting more children from vulnerable places, getting them to beg. So that nexus needs to be checked as well. It's just not about a child just coming to the street. And I know sometimes as an individual, we try to give something, and sometimes we see more people coming in depending on what busy street are we, traveling or walking or driving. So it's important element that begging has also an interlink to human trafficking.
Thank you for sharing that insight. I really didn't know. All right, so we have many more questions. So I'm going to try really fast to go through them. We have a question. What role do help desks such, or support programs play in this regard? How do they function?
I think help desk is there in every country. I think in some country like India, we have 1098, a child line, a helpline desk that actually respond to children in crisis of all forms of all kind of exploitation. And other countries has different help desks. But help desk needs to be linked to service providers and also linked to legal support system, so that there is not just about responding, but there's services that is also being interlinked to support the child in need at any point of time, that whatever the requirement would be.
I think in Pakistan the number is, and somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 1121, which is a child helpline, which where we can report sort of any number of these issues. But I think sort of we're gonna get stuck in a little bit of a loop here, which is that it needs to be sort of starts from the consumers, goes back to policymaking, goes to implementation, goes to much bigger macro issues of sort of the mix of industries we have. So I think uh, this plugs in best, I would say, into the kind of stories we can tell each other and the kind of conversation you want to have around it. So yes, if you see something which is a problem, we're not going to wait for some extraterrestrial force to come and sort of point that out for us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. So I think it's a little bit of picking ourselves from the bootstraps and trying to like have these conversations, tell these stories, and then point out issues where we see them.
So the next question we have is directly about the choices we can make as responsible citizens. So the question is, as responsible citizens, what can we do on an individual level to curb the prevalence of child labor's exploitation?
I think the first step each one of us should do is that I know that all of us require help in our house, especially global south. We all have help in our house. We should ensure that we don't employ a child in our house. That's the first step. Second step, even small vendors and small businesses, if they should not employ children, to actually run their businesses. And as consumer, if we see that children are being employed, we step one step backward and say we'll not purchase from that place that have child labor, or we will not eat in that restaurant that has child labor, or the dhaba, or whatever we do a purchase. So these are steps that one can take. And then looking at sometime if we have products which are cheap and we say, oh, it's better that we buy from here and not from there, at least asking a conscious question to ourselves, from where is it coming? Who's manufacturing it? If you're not too sure, don't buy it. So these are the simplest step that one can do as citizens.
I think take the responsibility of the educational expenses like books and other things of some child, because in our circle of friends we do that. We take that's kind of adopt a child, adopt a school as well. Some people adopt a school, some people adopt a child's education expenses. So that's also helpful, but again that's on a small scale, and actually state should do it on holistic and on a broader scale.
So I think actually just on that point, Nadapa's point, I think it's important because I've seen that starting now sort of really come across in the work that we're doing at Bunda Shams, where we initially used to have, like a clean water project can be a fairly expensive endeavor. We've been able to bring the cost of each project down to around $2,500. And what we've started seeing when we reached that benchmark was people actually want to sponsor entire communities. So I think it becomes more accessible for somebody who's trying to do either sadqa jariya or like zakat, or somebody who just wants to give. And what we start seeing is people come, this sponsor a clean water project costing $2,500 for a specific school, right? And they say like, I want this to get implemented in one of your school programs. So for instance, we implemented one in a school in Sadkabad, and there the whole history of it was that children weren't coming to school for exactly the kind of reason I pointed out earlier. And now I think the enrollment picked up. I'll share around it. It's a very cute video of the children then coming around and taking water, and then sort of doing boxes of mean child bath and whatnot. So it's, I think this is the narrative where you're able to actually go from that, us identifying a problem, some well-meaning individuals wanting to donate and sponsor, and then having the technology to actually go and implement that idea in a specific school to solve a specific problem. I think that life cycle just needs to happen on a much broader basis, because even with these sort of like clean water in school projects, if you did, we're obviously on a mission to reach 1 million people in the next 12 months. So we're obviously kind of like running stream. We've done, in the midst of implementing 25 projects with folks coming to support it. So I think that kind of lives, I'm sure all these panelists are doing amazing stuff in their nonprofit, and I think it's people coming together, finding sort of, and I tend to think of nonprofit leaders sort of having one foot in policymaking and the other implementation, so they're very nicely placed to some extent. And I think I would say that that's probably one of the best ways to do it. I do think that Anna might have accidentally dropped off, so we might need to give her a second to jump back on.
We can continue to converse in her absence, Hamza. Why don't you continue?
Absolutely, yes. That's what I was thinking. I think if you guys don't mind, I'll just read out the next question, and let you guys kind of riff off that. I think sort of the next one, which sort of I saw, which was pretty powerful, was what do you guys hope will come out of the research and dialogue, and what could be done as next steps, possibly as better policies or programs.
So I think I can give that an immediate crack, because I think with all of the research that's being done, some of the nuance will surface. What has been the element of dropout? What has been the transition from a child dropout into child labor? And really give us a better understanding of what the alternates are. Because exceptions will probably prove the norm, that when there is a parent who is able to make a choice, that parent's conscious first choice is unlikely to be to put the child in child labor. Um, for that parent, what are the alternates that one represents? So, as you were saying, Hamza, when it comes to water provision, if the alternate is not having clean water, and if there is that alternate that you can construct with the community, within the community, that allows the child to come into school, that allows the child a different life path. So, what I would hope is that as more research, as more clarity comes here, we would have a better sense of what those alternates are and what that represents. And Hamza, now that you're the de facto moderator of this discussion, I think we have a close in the next couple of minutes. So I leave that in your good hands.
Absolutely. I think where the moderators wanted to really, we've had a really cool discussion around a multitude of different issues that come together, from policy making to consumer choice to macro econ to some implementation ideas. I think it would be really good to hear from each of the panelists, and I'll go last, about one key takeaway that sort of like sums it up from your perspective. I think let's start with Hasina, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think one takeaway is we need to have organization working together more. So I think there has to be a collaborative and partnership within countries across borders, so that duplication of action on the ground does not take away resources and time, rather going into focus of complementing how we can eradicate child labor and how we can make state more responsible.
I think that's really powerful. I mean, Adaba, you're on mute if you want to yourself.
Yes, my takeaway is also the same, that we should strengthen our regional alliances like SARC countries, and we should work together to resolve these issues. And SARC is very important that we should have visa-free mobility among the region. And so we could meet each other, we could discuss our issues, and we could resolve them, because when ideas get together, we really come up with very good solutions. So SARC uh, must be strengthened. Yes.
So I can go next. I think for me, one key takeaway is a greater appreciation of the fact that this is a very complex issue, and I think in real life, a very complex issue must have very simple solutions, and those simple solutions can only be constructed if you have a real nuanced, in-depth understanding of multiple variables and how they interface. And I think that would be the big takeaway on how do we get that in-depth understanding so that simple, scalable solutions can come into play.
Absolutely. And I think that's an amazing segue into the one thought I was going to share, which was one, we need to have far many more of these conversations where we're able to bring together public intellectuals to implementation partners to government officials. And then to the extent that we can create those nimble solutions, of which hopefully the audience will appreciate the OSS box and Bunda Shams as one. And hopefully we can, collectively find a way to implement some projects, make some verifiable impact together, and then sort of like cap this and credit it to the conversation we had here today. So I'd leave it there, and sort of I think we sort of like we're appreciative of I think Beacon House providing this platform of the School of Tomorrow series of events, and I think it's important that we continue to sponsor such dialogues. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for your time, and for the organizers for making it happen. I would love to have Anam do it because she's been an amazing host throughout. But I think we'll thank her in absentia, and leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.